Hey, I'm Michael, and this is Michael in the Middle. It's an intergenerational relational podcast for people who are interested in better human interaction. I'm glad you're here. I think that you can do something to make life better for the people that cross your path every day. And I'm sure doing my best to do that very thing. And I hope that as you think about where you are these days, that you'll just get in the big middle of trying to do something great for somebody else. And sometimes greatness is actually found in simplicity. It's just doing the next right thing for the next person that crosses your path. Whether it's your family or your church or your colleague at work, maybe you need to ask if there's something new in terms of possibilities you've not yet seen in them. Clearly, I love my wife and sons and their families more than ever. The will to protect them has never been stronger. But I'm also learning that the distance between a hug and a chokehold is very small. I don't want to hold so tightly to what I want, to what I think, that I squeeze the life out of that which is most precious to me. I'm trying to let go, yes, and let God, cliche as it sounds, because I have to trust God to know the difference between what will kill me and what will give me a more abundant life. And I have to trust that God's ability to handle the unknown in between is greater than mine. One of my all-time favorite movies is What About Bob? Bill Murray played the afraid, insecure, I can't do this. That he played that role to perfection. He had to take some baby steps before he could get in that elevator. And sometimes I think I'm still taking those baby steps down the hall. So I'm praying today that I'll be strong enough to let go of that which has me bound and wise enough to hold on to that which will ensure my ultimate freedom. And that's the blog. But here's a postscript. Whatever the nature of your relationships are with loved ones or with people that you've been close to, particularly if it's a parent-child relationship, just know that the best thing you can do is let them know you believe in them and you trust them and that you're going to be there for them no matter what. Again, kind of sounds almost like a cliche, but the most important things our kids can glean from us is not only our wisdom, but our unconditional love and support for them as they work things out for themselves. Everybody has to make their own decisions, and ultimately, everyone is responsible for their own decisions. And the decision that I made many years ago about learning how to let go just a little bit has resulted in probably the best times I've ever had in my relationship with my sons, as they are not only my sons and the fathers of my grandchildren, but they are some of the very dearest friends that I have as well. And I'm glad I learned that lesson. And I'm glad I'm still learning that lesson. And I'm glad I learned how to be strong enough to let go. I've even had to do that with this podcast. I would love it if there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that were tuning in. But I've let go of what expectations I may have of what this is going to do in favor of allowing it to be what it needs to be in terms of the lives of the people that are participating in it even now. The message of goodness and kindness is not to be underrated. Sadly, a lot of people misappropriate grace to just give them license to live however, and then they can say they're sorry at some point.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is so unfortunate because the consequences of those choices,
For sure.
are not just wiped away.
Right.
But
Right.
anyway, I appreciate the sensitivity with which you approach these kinds of situations and the way that you tell people that, man, we're going to be here and
Right. Right.
we're going to walk with you through this, and you know, I the mere fact that you show an openness to work with people with whom you may disagree on certain points, um, I think actually opens the door even wider
Right.
to what you believe,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
about how life ought to be lived. So
Right. Right.
kudos on that. Really, really appreciate that. All right, hey, let's shift gears for just a minute.
Okay.
I love these convertible rides that you used to put up on social media with your dad, especially.
Yeah.
Um, you have a real zest for life. I know that you love the outdoors and that
Right.
sort of thing. What is there about is there a metaphor for something in your life that relates to joy, something like throwing the top back and driving down the
Yeah.
highway with the music up loud, or what are some of the things that give you life even outside of your sense of calling as a pastor and that sort of thing? Tell me about some of the
Right.
things you do for fun.
So when I was in college at Mount Vernon, Terrell Sanders, one of my professors there, who I dearly love, and I've kept in contact with over the years, he made a
Yeah.
statement one time in a class that said, you know, the best pastors and the best preachers are people that have a wide, you know, a vast experience of different things.
Yeah.
And he kind of in that moment, he just was kind of encouraging us: if you get an opportunity to do something, do it. You know, you'll be happy you did. You know, you'll be a better person for it, and it'll add to your ability to relate to people. And so I really took that to heart. And so the first thing that I did was it was spring break coming up. Our sophomore year of college, I think it was. We didn't have any money to go anywhere, and we saw this ad up in Canton, Ohio, for $99. You could learn to skydive and do 3 jumps.
Oh my.
So that was my first experience. So I remember telling Taylor Sanders, "Hey, remember what you said about that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "We're going skydiving." He's like, "Oh dear, I don't know if I meant that or not, you know." But so that's kind of been my approach since then. If there's an opportunity, you know, I like to jump on it and just take the opportunity. And so that kind of started it. And everything from the convertible rides you mentioned to, you know, if there's a, you know, I love watching the sunsets here on the Eastern Shore. I loved it in Texas too, just big open sky, and you can
Yeah.
almost see California, you know, as you look west.
Yeah.
And then here you get to watch that sunset in the water over here, like on the Nanticoke River, and just beautiful. So just living in the moment and taking advantage of whatever God, you know, whatever opportunities God places in front of you. And when we were in Texas, I got into hiking in Paladero Canyon. It's a canyon that's 1,000 feet deep, 120 miles long. I hiked every mile, every inch of that canyon more than a dozen times, probably over the
Wow.
years there. And in the process of that, we were close to the foothills of the Rockies there in New Mexico. And so we took a men's trip, and we were thinking over to New Mexico, and we asked, what could we do? I said, let's see if we can take a cool hike somewhere. And I looked up what's the tallest peak in New Mexico, and it was Wheeler Peak. And I said, let's climb Wheeler Peak. We're going to be right there. We were planning to camp out near Taos, and Wheeler Peak's right at the top of the Taos ski valley. And so I said, let's go climb Wheeler Peak. And so we did it. We took a bunch of guys up there, and some made it, some didn't. It's 13,161 feet.
Oh wow.
And so that was the first time I got on top of a mountain, and I was hooked. And I soon got my 2 sons on top of Wheeler Peak. And then we started going to Colorado, and we climbed Mount Elbert, the tallest one there, which is 14,434 or something like that. And now we've done, my oldest son and I, Alan, who's the youth pastor here with me, we've climbed 22 or 23 different 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. And, you know, my wife will tell you, when I'm on vacation, I don't stop. I'm always looking for something to go do. What's something I could do while I'm here? I recently went to Phoenix for a little, for some meetings, and I was asking, what could I do in Phoenix? And your son Chad said you should go hike Camelback Mountain.
Yeah.
So I ended up not flying out till 11 o'clock that night and didn't arrive till the next morning in Baltimore. But I did that so I could get on top of Camelback
Love it.
Mountain before I got back. So that's just
That's
kind of my approach, and I do that with people too. Like if somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to go see if I can go pray for this guy that's down here in the street," I mean, I'm going to go. Not just because I'm a pastor and because it's a spiritual thing, but I want to go meet this guy. I want to go have this experience and get to share life with this person. And by doing that, you know, I've got a bunch of stories I could share, right?
you have found a way to perfectly illustrate, in a sense, for me, what it means to, you know, whatever your calling is. Yours happened to be a vocational pastor, but I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, and I repeat myself from time to time, is that I want people to realize that when they get in the middle of a situation or an opportunity, they they can they can make a difference in somebody else's life. And
Right.
when you make a difference in somebody else's life, man, it changes yours as well.
For
And
sure.
it gets messy
Yeah.
sometimes. It
Yeah.
gets difficult sometimes.
For
It doesn't
sure.
always end up the way you want it to.
Right.
But man, at least you gave it a go. You
Exactly.
didn't just sit there, you know?
Yeah.
And
Right.
so
Exactly.
when did you start writing songs for yourself to sing?
When I fell in love with gospel music, I began to write. I do not write music. I write kind of to everything to a dummy melody,
Okay.
which would be Go Tell Aunt Rhody or Jingle Bells or anything that happens to pop into my mind, just so that I can find the proper meter for the song. And usually I give the better lyrics to somebody that is good with melody. I began doing that when I first married Brian in 1989. I think it was 1990 that I co-wrote my first song with the very highly decorated Joel Lindsay and Niles Borup. Niles wrote Via Dolorosa, and Joel wrote Orphans of God and 1,000 other that you would recognize.
Yeah.
And I started co-writing with them and started learning the process of co-writing. And that process really thrilled my creative nature, because I realized in those sessions, I learned as well as created. And they were wonderful teachers in the guise of co-writers. And
Amazing.
they
What
have
was the first song?
It was a song called The Toolbox about my grandfather.
Oh man.
And it was a great song to sing live, because I usually sing in the South, and everybody that had a granddaddy saw Granddad's Toolbox. So, but that co-writing relationship with Joel Lindsay has continued throughout the years, and we've written many songs together, a lot of which you would not have heard because they're stuck in a publisher's computer somewhere, but some of which I have recorded myself. And Joel conducts a wonderful co-writing retreat where he asks about 15 pro writers, full-time Christian writers, to come and write with 15 or 20 part-time writers or beginning writers that he sees potential in.
Yeah.
And we put all of our names in a pillowcase and draw out 3 names, and we write and co-write. So it's kind of random. But every time I've ever written at this retreat, I've gotten to write with a pro writer who has taught me multiple lessons about songwriting. And that gives me time to learn and produce. And in the meantime, came out of one of those retreats. One of my co-writers was going through, she was a nurse, and she had made some mistakes as a nurse because of pain that she was experiencing. And she was going through very dire circumstances. She was about to lose her profession. And we sat down, and I had just lost my nephew to a bad wreck. And we sat down and started talking about God's favor and his wisdom, and about the book of Job. And we wrote in the meantime, just to remind ourselves the things that Job went through are very similar to what we go through today, and the agony and misery, the pain, the suffering. But the book of Job has never been about suffering. The book of Job is about God's grace in the midst of suffering. And so we wanted to write God's grace in a song about suffering. And I think we accomplished that.
Oh, but in the meantime, You're the lifter of my head, and in the lean time, you're the giver of my bread. Lord, your goodness is too wonderful for me. I believe my Redeemer is alive, even in the meantime.
It's a beautiful song musically that matches the lyric in a sort of magical way. And sometimes I listen to a song and I think somebody tried to force a lyric into a melody they really liked, or vice versa. You know, somebody found a melody that, "Well, let's see if we can slap some words on this." You know? But in the meantime, it's one of those that you know marries the tune and the words together in a powerful and healing sort of way.
Yes.
You know, I think sometimes Christians feel like they can't be totally honest about the challenges of life, you know, because somehow that's not as victorious as we think it needs to be. But I think we validate the work of God in our lives when we recognize that, you know, he's right there in the middle of
That's
whatever it is that we're dealing with, you know,
that's
and
right.
so
That's
uh,
a good point. But we validate it. Yes.
yeah,
God's grace is a wonderful thing to rejoice about. It needs an anthem, it needs a song, it needs drum beats and shouts of joy, but
mhm,
there are lots of tears also mixed into God's grace with us. So, and when we recognize that, I think we live the abundant life,
yeah.
and that's what people see us going through hardship and trial and suffering, but still having God's grace upon us.
If you're taking notes, first of all, I'm really surprised. But here are some ideas for finishing well from a guy who still believes a better day is coming. Here's the first thing I think we could do. I think we could be generous. In my doctoral studies on the subject of generosity, I learned that the word in its earliest forms was taken from the Latin language and referred to a nobility of birth. It later evolved in its understanding to become a nobility of purpose. And the definition that resonated most with me was simply that generosity is the virtue of giving good things to others freely and abundantly. In terms of generosity, I also learned that there is scientific proof that even thinking about doing something good for someone else provided a positive neural response. That is, one's brain, when connected with a generous thought, reacts positively. A group led by a researcher, last name of Park, several different people that were working with Park specifically found that generosity and happiness improve well-being and can facilitate societal success. You know, I mean, it's one thing to think about doing something good. It's another to cross the bridge to doing something specifically generous on behalf of another person. Bottom line is, being generous is good for your health. Second thing I think you got to be when you're trying to run this marathon called life, you got to be determined. Marathons of any type require a level of determination that defies the odds of finishing. It's sad to note that only about 50 to 60% of doctoral students, for example, ultimately finish their degree. There are many reasons why this is so, and many of them are understandably valid, but there is one common factor among those who do. They are determined to finish no matter what. Third, be patient. Continuing the marathon analogy, long distance runners have to stay patient. Sprinters must be disciplined, but they also have to run with urgency in the heat of the moment. Marathoners have to monitor both pace and markers And they also have to monitor their own bodies along the way. Being patient is more a state of mind than it is a physical reaction. So, whatever you're going through that seems to be taking forever, stay patient long enough to see that you are closer to the finish line than when you started. Sounds kind of elementary, but it's the truth. Like my friend Matt Hastings often says, and I have shared it with many people, you're doing better than you think you are. Fourth, be kind. I'm convinced that kindness is not overrated. I've said it before on this podcast. Being kind does not indicate weakness nor acquiescence to all that is wrong in this world. But who ever created lasting change that won the hearts and minds of people through maltreatment? Evil often wins a battle, but it never really wins the war, even when the conflict is labeled as such. As a Christian, I have grown so weary of vindictive epithets directed at fellow human beings that are, we believe, created in the image of God. I think it's time to wage war on the evils in this world with unfettered kindness, the kind of kindness that I believe can only come from the hand of the Almighty.
We figure out this is what we want to do with our lives. This is what we think we want to do vocationally. And here are the, the 1, 2, 3 steps that you take to get to where you want to be with those goals. And so many amazing things happen in the process, maybe of trying to do those 1, 2, 3 steps, and so it ends up being like something totally different, but all the way along there, you're learning things and you're becoming who you ultimately are and who you're destined to be because of the experiences that you're going through at the time. Does that resonate at all? I mean, can you think of a time where, you bumped into something that was transformational and totally unexpected?
For sure. And it's funny, as you were talking, it popped in my mind that several years ago, someone had given me a book. I think it was by Frederick Buechner. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. And I think it was called Listen to Your Life. Does that sound at all?
Sounds right. I mean, it's a great sentiment. Yeah.
Yeah. Even just the title kind of made me, when they handed me that book and I looked at it and I thought, that is pretty profound, because how often do we just kind of float through life and we're really not paying attention to what's going on? And that's even a conversation that I've started to have with my kids regularly, is that you need to, even while you're young, you need to start paying attention to what you enjoy doing and what you're just naturally gifted at.
Right.
And over time, things are going to start to unfold and opportunities are going to present themselves. And because you know yourself, you have that self-awareness, you're going to hopefully get to where you're supposed to be a lot more quickly than maybe some of us who have taken a little bit longer because we weren't paying attention. I'm pointing at myself for those of you who are listening to the audio. So that's actually part of my story. So I was working for Dave Ramsey and I was learning a lot, but I guess I would say, to use Dave's words, I was in the wrong seat on the bus.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed working there. I had no complaints about the company or anything, but I was in a position where I was sitting in a cubicle all day, making phone calls and dying a slow, painful death, if I could be real honest with you. I wasn't getting to use any of my creativity.
Yeah.
And so after quite a few years of just kind of grinding it out, I realized that I needed to change.
Yeah.
So I kind of was given an opportunity for a short time after that to start doing marketing for faith-based films, which, if you've seen many faith-based films, about 1 out of every 7 of them does very well. And that's trying to say it quickly. And that's probably true of non-faith-based films as well. But I also, around that time, I heard someone say that good marketing makes a bad product die faster. So it's like if we were doing a good job of marketing these movies and the movie was not good, then that just meant that it was going to bomb quicker. And that was actually what we saw happening. So that did not last very long. I did that for about a year. And then on the side, I kind of started doing photography and video just for some small businesses here locally.
Yeah.
And my wife was really the one who was watching this whole thing unfold. And she said to me one day, as the marketing the movies was kind of going down, she said, "Have you thought about pivoting over and trying out this video thing?"
I love
And
it.
quite honestly, I had not thought about that because I think, you know, making that leap to working on your own and all the risk involved with that and having a family, it was just, I think, more than what I was ready for at that moment. And sometimes we just need somebody in our lives to say, "You're capable of doing this."
What's on your list for the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I'm at a really, Amy and I are in a really good spot. We've got a Reston who's eight, almost 9 years old, who will be in this 2023. And I'm just really focused on being a good husband and dad and son and friend and brother. It might sound a little counterintuitive to what this podcast is about, and I know we're trying to reach a lot of people, but I came across a term in a John Eldredge book this past week called benevolent detachment. And I'm realizing I can't be caught up in everything that's going on or worried about everybody, but in my network, my small network, it's okay to be kind of really good at the relationships that I'm closest to, and so that's really what I'm focused on. I want to do a good job at work, but more important than anything, I want to be famous at home. That's another book that I read this year. But I want Amy, and I want Reston, and I want you guys, and I want a couple of my closest friends to know that if they need something of me, if they need any type of leadership, if they need help in any way, that I have not gotten myself spread so thin that I can't help. And, he's talking to his uncles or me. Your best friends we see as aunts and uncles, and I kind of want that small, interconnected, close network, for Reston and Amy and all of us to be able to rely on. I feel like that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Next 3 to 5 years, I don't really know. It's like I'm in a business that is very transient, and there's a lot of work sometimes, and there's not a lot of work other times. So it's weird. I would just like to have a stable life here in Nashville. With my family, I'm Austin, and then professionally, I use James Austin Johnson as my full name. And I like, you called me James Austin earlier, which I know you had to do that, but I don't like when my family calls me something other than Austin. I don't like when my friends in comedy call me Austin as a joke. I like having this life here.
That's
and then
cool.
A professional life that's way
cool.
out
When we
there.
saw that firsthand, it was really
in the internet.
neat,
Oh yeah, it's nice to.
Yeah, you and Amy got to go see the show, didn't you?
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. We were with Austin in his dressing room, and then with his friends, they didn't know who Austin was, which was pretty cool. That you've been in that intentional.
They call me Jadge at work.
You mean James? Who's Austin? So it was neat. Yeah, proud of him.
Yeah, because I just, it's it is a different mode to shift into, and I don't know. I don't necessarily like blending the two all that often, just because it's when I'm home, I want to be at home, and when I'm in a professional setting, I want to be that guy. And I also have a public persona that I operate on the internet and on TV that is different from my personal one, and so I think I just want to get a little bit more comfortable at navigating both worlds, and make sure that Homer's being taken care of, and yeah, I enjoy that I'm sort of bi-coastal. Like I live in New York on that coast, and then the beach of Percy Priest Lake here in Nashville. So you know, but also I do want to become, you know, a gazillionaire and be really famous, and you know, have 3 wives, live in Arizona where I can have the 3 wives simultaneously. Oh man, that would be awful. I know. I'm sorry if you're watching this and you're from one of those communities that thinks that's cool, but I watched that show on TLC and I'm like, every problem on the show could have been solved by not marrying 4 people.
Good old
I'm
Cody.
sorry if you do that.
Good old Cody.
Yeah, Cody. It's like, oh wow, that guy.
He's got terrible hair too.
Oh, whew. He like curls his hair with like a little curling thing. So yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. Make weird hair decisions and marry 5 strange women.
Sounds like a plan. Oh, I know having 4 children keeps us busy, but
that might be weirder than the 4 wives.
And that's not all, because we have a dog, we have 4 cows, 2 goats, 5 or 6 chickens. Last phone call with Ashley, I think we might be down a chicken. So
and a partridge in a pear tree. That's
yes.
how you're supposed to finish it.
Yes, and so we intentionally did that to have a you know, quiet home where, you know, the kids are outside, and we haven't bought eggs in 4 or 5 months, and you know, just kind of somewhat resemblance of life on Mill Creek a little bit. Wanted the kids to have that experience. A dream of sometime in the near future would be to maybe get a little travel trailer to pull behind, you know, the truck or SUV, and like the road trips we went on between Nashville and Oklahoma City and Kansas City and Trevecca basketball games, to give that experience to the kids as well. So that's something we would love to make happen, because you know, thinking about Braden being 11 years old, you know, before he's off to college, we have spent more time with him than we have ahead of us. So wanting to do something, you know, in the next couple of years while we have our 4 children under the roof, and maybe while they're younger, we might even homeschool for a year, and travel, or, you know, have a balance, you know, spend a few weeks or a couple months out on the road and do it, and but still have the home base.
So here's what I want to say to you. You may think the odds of your situation, or the situation of someone you know and love, you may think these odds are not stacked in your or their favor, but I'm here to tell you, this is what I believe. God knows your name. God knows their name, and has a picture of y'all in his phone. Maybe that's a little corny, but I believe it's true. I want you to be encouraged, and encourage someone else with an act of kindness that may be as simple as paying attention. You never know who you might run into. That's what I want to leave with you today. People are all around us. We see people all the time. We see people in mass. We see people in groups. We even see people in smaller settings. We see their bodies. Do we see their souls? Do we see them as precious in the sight of God? I'm pretty convinced that one of the best things Christians could do, you know, there's a lot of talk about people who are turning away from the church and organized religion. And honestly, maybe one of the reasons most often cited is that people who leave see things in people who say they believe and follow after God, but they don't see and sense a feel of actual caring. I want to close with a quote from one of my favorite books from 30 years ago. A guy named Ken Gire, Gire, wrote a book called Windows of the Soul, and it remains a very important book in my life. I won't go into detail about it right now, but excuse me, it's a book about finding what it is that you are gifted to do and chasing after that. It's just a great book. But here's a quote from Ken Gire, Windows of the Soul, that relates to what I'm talking about in terms of seeing others and taking time to notice them. Here's what Gire said. I know a wheel is starting to fall off when the meal I'm preparing becomes more important than the people I'm preparing it for. When my work becomes more important than the family I'm working for to support. When a point I'm making becomes more important than the person I'm making it to. That's how I can tell I've lost the still axis. When I lose sight of what's more important, when I lose a sense of the sacredness of another human being, especially the human beings closest to me, especially the ones in my family. I mean, a lot of people know that Shonda is one of the all-time best-selling female comedians in recorded history.
Yes, it's true.
I mean,
you know.
How many different recording projects have you done?
Oh my Lord, probably 30. 20 of them made it to a store. And then I think I have 11 gold and 9 platinum projects.
That's just astounding.
Oh, it blows my mind. Listen, but it cracks me up when they had a big party for me, the RIAI, whoever gives you, gold records or whatever they call it, the recording arts industry.
Yeah.
He read this little proclamation. They were having a little gathering, and I looked at the guy and I said, "This is so shocking." Because you have your head down, you just do the work.
Yeah.
And it was probably, I'd been doing what I do maybe 20 years.
Okay.
And I was just amazed, and I said, because there's Whoopi Goldberg and Chelsea Handler was just starting, and Ellen DeGeneres, and I was, and he goes, I know, we did the math twice because we've never heard of you. That is the Lord's way, that He has always been able to keep me humble.
Keep you humble.
When I do a podcast or things like this, or visit with somebody, or even on stage, I worry because I'll still shed a tear or two, and I'm always afraid there's going to be some counselor that says, you probably still need some work. I'm like, I have a brother, he straightened me out. But it still is always tender. When I look back at my life, I've had some rough, I remember watching this documentary. When Laughing in the Dark came out, it debuted at the number 2 spot across the country, which was a shock. Or maybe it was number 4, and then Enough was number 2. That was a follow-up documentary. I've had 4 documentaries about my life, and I'm still alive. So I don't know. I don't know what y'all are going to do when I'm dead, but all that to say, I remember watching.
Well, first thing we're going to do is cry.
Yes, okay. Please cry, and then laugh, and then cry. And somebody has to wet their pants. But I remember.
The older I get, the less of a problem
that's exactly right. So. I always said, God, I want to work until I make people wet their pants. And then I go, but I don't want to work when I'm wetting my pants. I need to retire. But I remember sitting in the movie theater with my son and watching Laughing in the Dark. And, and it goes through your whole life and all of this stuff. Yeah. And I leaned over to him and said, my life sucks. And he goes, duh. But it really doesn't. I've had pain. I've had every kind of death I think you can imagine. I've had horrible things happen to me. Some things that will not be, told until I'm dead. But dating is a very danger. Let me just say that. That I have had horrible things happen, and yet I can't stop loving Jesus.
How'd you get started in, actually touring and doing comedy dates?
My brother, was great. I had a manager. I've had several. I've been taken to the cleaners twice in my career. Had to go through a whole financial mess with word records because, trying to get all your money and all this. It was just, I've had one of those where I felt like I never finally latched on to the right guy, you know what I mean? And that was a little friction between David and I. I wanted to come home and know that he was managing the store and he was golfing,
Yeah.
and then the bills piled up and all that to say, it was tough. It was tough for a lot of women that, are out there being the breadwinner and all. It just, for our upbringing, it was complete opposite of what I thought my life was supposed to be. But all that being said, I latched on to a manager who was good and excited about what I did. He loved the aspect that at the end of the funny, I always felt it important to me. And that was just my calling. It doesn't throw, guilt on any other comic out there. But for me and my calling, I always thought it was, I wanted people to see, my husband used to say this when he was teaching English, show, don't tell. When you're writing, show, don't tell. And I thought there was so much more important. The thing that would show and not tell is at the end of the funny, if they knew a little bit about where I came from, it would be such a shocker that there's no doubt there's a God in my life.
Okay.
And so that's what started telling my story and aspects of it, or little tidbits here and there. And so I would tell what the Lord had brought me from, and the losses and the grief in a quick little nutshell version, and it worked. And this guy, this manager, he saw it working right away. And my brother was doing some booking and stuff and helping me, and he got a hold of Women of Faith.
Okay.
And he said, my sister's funny.
Yeah.
But she's got a story, and I think it was Sheila Walsh or something who was out having a baby, and I filled in for her in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the Riverfront Coliseum, and it was 20,000 women there,
right.
And I did my thing, and that day, I mean, there's a whole funny backstory of it, but my phone never stopped ringing.
Wow.
And that was 33 years ago, and my phone still doesn't stop ringing. And I don't say that in a bragging way. I say that just as shocked as anybody. Sure. But I think for me in my house, what I think makes the difference between me just being a clean comic, which I have done at corporate events. I did a whole USO trip. They didn't want you talking about Jesus, and as a matter of fact, they give you a list. But anyway, I've been in places where you couldn't do it, your story, and I feel unfulfilled. I feel like that just wasn't what I was called to be. I used to argue with the Lord, let me just be a clean comic. I don't want to tell all this stuff all the time. When I check my mail, I don't get that little, that joke was funny, or I like what you said about your Depends undergarments, or, I get when you talked about the death of your sister, I just lost my sister, or thank you for sharing about being a widow. I've been a widow now, blah, blah. And that's what I get. Yeah. And I love that.
The intersection of joy and sorrow
is the same road.
It's really.
Do you know that even in your brain, the same stuff in your brain, I'm ruining it, but, John Dix, if he was here, Professor Dix, he could tell us. But the endorphins and the same spot where that euphoria comes from in the laughing and the crying is the same spot in the brain.
That I did not know. But
it's really interesting.
It actually makes sense because it's the heart of it.
So Austin and I are practically in the medical field.
One of the things that I have been thinking about the most and sharing this podcast with the world, who am I to tell you how to live? Who am I to tell you what decisions you need to make when it comes to relating to different types of people? I just have to speak for myself. I know what I have to do. And every opportunity that I have to encourage people to look at people not as representations of a certain demographic, but just as people. And if there's anything that any of us can do along the way, like Mary Meredith did for me and like Charles and Shirley Johnson did for me, to see people for who they are and not for what they look like or where they come from, we'll
we'll get to a better place. The world will be a kinder and more forgiving and more inviting and more inclusive kind of world. That's a big part of my story that has shaped who I have become all these years later. And I don't apologize for the emotion that is overtaking me in this moment. I am humbled to be involved in so many different ways with people that I just think if we'll find a way to continue to just be in the middle of doing something good for someone else, the world will take a turn for the better. There's a lot of hate and divisiveness in this world. Don't be part of that. Be a part of bringing people together. And I believe that God will bless our efforts as we attempt to do that. I'm white, you're black. I mean, I guess if you're watching, you can tell that too. But I mean, I told a little bit of my story about growing through my high school years in Jackson, Mississippi in episode 26. And I still don't understand how people today could struggle with, the idea that, or maybe they don't even struggle. They just think there are certain inequities that are just endemic in the human race. And how in the world do we combat that? How do we help people understand that we're all one human race? Yes. We're all made in the image of God. What are some things that you have personally tried to do to help people understand how we ought to be able to get along a little better? What are some things that you're thinking and working on these days?
Man, so it's biblical for me, from the standpoint of that. The thing I hang my head on is that Jesus was questioned about what was the greatest command, and he responded that it's to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. If you click on that direct link, that hyperlink, it goes back into Deuteronomy, where God has given out all these laws, and basically he's saying, the reason I'm giving you these laws is because I want you to be wise and I want you to practice justice. And I wish Dr. Boone was here. He could probably he could tear this apart, man. But whenever he says wise, what he's saying is hokmah. And hokmah is this deep term that it's not just wisdom as we know it in our own mind, but it's also like your spirit. It's like who you are. It's what God has created you into as you've lived through it. I love to hear you talk about growing up in Jackson and then my story as well. That is a part of our hokmah, our spirit, our experience, what we do. And then we are to take that and practice justice with it. And that's tzedek, I think is the term for that. And what that means is just righteousness or right relatedness to one another.
Oh man, that's awesome.
So all God is calling on us to do is to make the most of what he's given us and to dedicate it to others. And what we see right now, Mike, is that we've been sold a lie, I think, by the society in large. And I think the root of all evil is, when you hear the love of money, is basically fear, our security. We're terrified of losing what's ours. And so that's what I see people fighting over, is that, no, this is what I believe the world to be, and you're encroaching on that. No, I believe the world to be this, and people are fighting over that. When at the end of the day, it's not about being afraid about each other. It's about finding a way to love and do right and be in right relationship with one another.
Yeah.
And I hope I can give something practical to bring into that. What I would say is just be willing to be vulnerable with other people. That's where I've learned the most. I've had misconceptions about people, and whenever I'm vulnerable, they always surprise me every single time.
I have a feeling that the students that you're impacting at Franklin Road Academy have appreciation for you in this moment. But I think there's going to be a lot of people that could end up writing stories about their encounters with you the way I did about Mary Meredith when I was in high school in Jackson, Mississippi. The people that our young people can, the folks that our young people can encounter in their younger years can be marked for life in a really good way. Even when they don't know what's happening, they'll look back on it and they'll see. I'm a big believer in, markers in our lives where we can look back and say, that person at that moment in my life changed it all for me, changed it for the better. And that's what you're doing. That's what you're giving your life to. I know you got to run. I totally understand that. I could probably talk to you for hours. Maybe we need to schedule another one
Let's
of these.
do it. Part 2.
Michael in the Middle is all about finding ways to get out there in the middle of life and do something good for somebody else like this man has done.